Michael Osling here with Lori Chickering. Lori is the author of Beyond Left and Right. He is also the co-author of Voice of the People, which is right here. Highly recommend that book. He is founder and president of Educate Girls Globally, and he is the co-founder and co-editor of the Transpartisan Review. How you doing, Lori?
Just fine, Michael. Great to be here.
It's great to have you. So you have worked and you work in a wide variety of fields, but for the sake of this conversation, let's stick to foreign policy. What is your transpartisan understanding and approach to foreign policy, U.S. foreign policy, and compare and contrast it to what we might call the kind of bipartisan consensus, very mechanistic consensus on U.S. foreign policy?
Well, I would begin that subject by saying that unless our foreign policy can return to a bipartisan policy where people can depend on a policy from one presidency to the next, our policy can't possibly succeed because no one will trust it. And we not only have no such agreement in a way within the system, what there is agreement about is really very far removed from the actual problems and issues that we're facing in the new principal priority concerns of foreign policy, which are the traditional and tribal states of the larger Middle East, instead of the older large state adversaries like the Soviet Union and the Nazi Germany and so on, where it was all about governments. The new challenges of foreign policy are really about moving beyond and reaching beyond the relations with governments to the larger society, because the weak states we're facing are really states marked by strong non-state actors and forces, including culture, which are the main things we need to address. And the policies based on governments has no chance to do that because the governments are weak, and often the non-state actors and forces are stronger than the governments. I have worked in I founded an organization promoting girls' education in very difficult places in traditional societies, and I did this in part because I felt that in relation to those countries, nation building is a crucial part of what foreign policy has to be, but it is never going to work the way the foreign policy community is now addressing it, as a problem only of governments, a problem of getting institutions right, of having a system of laws and a court system and so forth. The problem in these countries is that a large part of the countries are traditional cultures that are removed from the mainstream societies, and they are feeding grounds for terrorists and for insurgents. And the heart of a new foreign policy needs to aim to promote nation building and also to promote empowerment of those peoples to resist insurgencies, because we can't go chasing around shooting insurgencies and hope that will ever lead anywhere except to our own bankruptcy, as has happened in so many places. The problem here is that this is a transpartisan issue because there's no reason why both left and right, Republicans and Democrats, won't ideologically embrace this vision of foreign policy. But you can't find it in the policy debate at all, because the debate is all about governments and what governments do. And this is a failing not only of the debate on foreign policy, but it also is on domestic policy. The whole debate is focused on how the government should spend money, as if spending money and solving problems are the same thing. But they aren't. They aren't on domestic policy, and they aren't on foreign policy. On health, for instance, the debate is not about health. It's about how to spend money on health. And so the whole debate is about considering those things the same, while subsidizing only one approach to health, which is the American Medical Association allopathic medicine, which very often is extremely expensive and ineffective. This is a poverty program for the AMA. The whole debate on both sides of the aisle, and it's a way of taxing and forcing people who are looking for better ways to do things, forcing them to make sacrifices to pay for health care twice, once for themselves in the alternative medicines and alternative approaches to medicine, and to subsidize the AMA allopathic medicine. The same thing is true really in foreign policy. It's all about mechanistic things. It's all about, if it's about health, it's about subsidizing doctors. If it's about education, it's subsidizing teachers and the establishment that run those organizations. What is the group that's left out in all of these situations are people, and people, how people behave and engage in public issues is often much more important than what the experts do going down trying to fix them. And this is especially true, I think, in foreign policy toward these tribal societies. Do you want to intervene and ask me questions?
Yeah, let me. I have quite a few questions based on what you've said already. So what I hear you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, you make a distinction between governments and governing, because those tribal societies have governing bodies. They don't have governments as we think of governments in the industrial and the post-industrial world. Is that accurate?
Yeah, the word that I use instead of governments is governance. Governance refers to all forms of interaction among people to accomplish things, and there is a lot of governance in in local levels, in local arenas where people are trying to solve problems, and where citizens are very active and empowered to try and solve problems. But they're completely disempowered in the model of larger politics, where it's all about who gets the money and who doesn't. This is a crucial thing in the tribal societies, because all energy in those societies is local. It's in the tribe, it's in the family or the community. And if you don't, they regard in very traditional societies, these societies that we are facing in the major problems we're facing in foreign policy now, outsiders are considered enemies. And one of the outsiders is the central government. The way you can build nations in those is only from a bottom-up approach, by engaging with these communities and allowing them to engage with the neighbor next door, who is now an enemy. In our case, we do it by building engagement and relationships between daughters and their fathers. And the key moment in that engagement is when the daughters who have dropped out of school stand up in a public meeting and make a plea to the men to give them, quote, a chance in life. And the heart of that is really about their wanting to have lead self-directed lives, and not lives merely defined by the roles that tradition has assigned to them. And the way I've started talking about this is that the reason why nothing works is that in the way currently we do it mechanistically, everybody is an object. And objects don't accomplish anything. They just continue doing what they're doing. The key thing is to try and promote change and allow people to advance beyond being objects to being subjects, because it's people as subjects that do everything. And if you look at, in a couple of the articles in the last issue of the Transpartisan Review, we explored what principles underlay 5 sort of exemplary programs dealing with the most difficult populations. They're in all geographies. They're on a variety of issues. And one of them is my organization, Educate Girls Globally. But they all run by the by the same principles, and they are all embraced as transpartisan programs. They are embraced right across the political spectrum, not only in this country, but also if you go to foreign countries. The girls' community schools in Upper Egypt, for instance, run by UNICEF, or our program running in northern India, they're all embraced right across the spectrum. There's no disagreement. EGG, my program, is in 7,000 schools in 2 states of India. It has served over 1 million children, and we have never had a case of either opposition or significant conflict in a single school. And that's why. There are 2 reasons. One, because they're based on personal engagement and active citizenship, where people come to trust each other and accomplish amazing things. And the other is that they work and operate organically rather than mechanically. When the government does anything, it's always mechanical. Everything changes on Tuesday. So on Tuesday, everybody mobilizes to oppose and to do it because they're frightened of the uncertainty of outcome. In an organic process, nobody sees any difference between Tuesday and Wednesday because it's moving glacially, yet it can move quite fast. It just doesn't move very fast, and it doesn't mobilize anybody in opposition on Tuesday. And all anybody knows is that things get gradually better, and the whole thing is transformed. That is what we should be doing in foreign policy, and if we did, the parties and the country would come behind the new policy. We would be empowering groups in other countries, so the main energy for new initiatives would come from them rather than from us. And that is one of the most important things in a world dominated by social media. The opportunities to connect and engage with people on a mass scale at a tiny fraction of what we're spending for troops over there is astonishing. Yet this kind of approach is absolutely invisible, not only to the politicians, but also to the foreign policy community who are obsessed with governments.
So let me ask you a question. Since you brought up EGG, Educate Girls Globally, a few times, you started to give kind of an example of how the subjectivity, the relationship between the father and the daughter emerge to support the daughter going to school. Can you walk us through how that actually works in practice, so people can get an idea of how you organically create the conditions for the education of females in these countries, and then talk about the dynamics as they will shift as women become more educated?
Sure. The part of the program is that it's focused on them, not on us. The traditional model of social service is about experts coming in and fixing people. This is not going to work to anybody. Fixing people is about objects, and that's why very little happens. Years ago, I heard about a research that people who had problems preferred to relate to computers rather than to psychiatric social workers, because the computers weren't judgmental. The social workers were judgmental, and they shrunk down into themselves, and there was just no relationship. Our program is really basically all about the other people. It's also basically based on ownership. Our belief is that one of the reasons why people are living in role-driven traditional societies is that they don't own anything. All they have are general sort of concerns, and that explains why many of them live their lives in opposition. One way of putting it is narratives of opposition to everything, because they feel completely disempowered. In our program, one of the first things we established is who owns the schools. We work only in government schools, and the government schools, basically, the way they're traditionally operated, are very hierarchical. They involve the government telling the teachers and everybody else exactly what to do. They're rule-driven in a way just like traditional societies, and they're depressed for the same reason, the teachers and the bureaucrats and all of that. The very first public meeting we have, where we come to get people together and to talk about the condition of the school and the relationship of communities to the school, is to ask them who owns the school. And the first thing they say, everybody says, is the government. And the next thing that happens is there's a half hour complaining about what the government isn't doing. But the objective of that first meeting is to encourage everybody to understand, which they do, that the school will never be any better than they make it. And that is the moment when they take ownership of the school. And the heart of a lot of what we do is to create initiatives for action in the community based on that ownership, where they take on tasks and they do things to improve the school. They take on social improvement development projects in which they build latrines, they build water facilities, creating clean water, and so on. To give you a sense of how this works, I like to say our only currency is empowerment. We give nobody any money. But in 500 schools, after 2 years, 178 schools had clean water that didn't have it before.
Wow.
Without our giving them anything. The number of schools with toilets for girls increased from 45% to 70%.
Wow.
And that's true of these projects that take place. This is the general community activities. We also, another activity we have, which is really focused specifically on girls, is something we call girls' parliaments. Girls' parliaments are a way of highlighting girls as leaders and role models for the school. They are elected by both boys and girls, but the girls' parliaments become the leaders of the schools, and they stay together. These are even including many girls who grow up afraid to speak up in front of boys. So there is a huge cultural crush that they have to live under, which holds them back in school. It makes them believe they don't have a right to school, right to education, or that they can succeed in it. But after 2 years, these girls become so powerful that they basically often will say they want boys in the girls' parliament. And when I witnessed this a year and a half ago in northern India, my colleague translating Hindi said they want boys in the girls' parliament. And I really didn't expect that. And I said, well, how many boys are we talking about? Thinking it might be a handful. The answer that came back in Hindi was that they wanted 50-50. They didn't want any numbers advantage. They wanted to go toe-to-toe with the boys. In another example, the chief magistrate of a district went to a girls' parliament conference this spring, and he thought he had scheduled 15 minutes for his meeting there. What he saw so blew his mind that he discarded. He scratched his whole schedule for the afternoon, stayed more than 2 hours, and he told Angela, our executive director, that he wanted to see her as soon as possible in his office. What he had seen is that the girls had become so empowered. They were talking back both to the village elders and to the police, dressing them down, criticizing them for not giving them security, for not doing various things, for forcing them to re-answer questions when they regarded the answers as inadequate. Well, Angela went to his office and he said, I want your program in every school in the district at all levels. Now, this was an increase. We were in 50 schools in this district, serving about 30,000 children. These are secondary schools, so they're bigger. And what he was saying is that he wanted it in 2,300 schools, serving 340,000 children. And he also wanted us to train ministry staff to implement the program. Now, this is focused. we're still trying to work at how we're going to do this, because although that meant that they were going to pay 80% of the cost of the program instantly, which is where we're headed. The whole program has been designed to transfer to governments, and we will then work with governments to go to every school. So it's not just working with a handful of kids, which is what everybody else does. And the empowerment of these people, you can see why this would make an incredible difference in foreign policy. Instead of the helpless conversations that people in foreign policy say about how we can't affect or promote change in other countries. Well, the answer is, of course, we can't do that. But you can encourage, if you organize institutions in the right way, which means based on an ownership, and with leadership coming from them, there's no end to the changes that you can make. All of this is just invisible to the foreign policy community because they don't know anything about it. And what you don't know about, you don't tend to have any interest in talking about.
Would you say that what you're doing parallels with what Hernando de Soto did and continues to do with property rights?
Hernando is one of my closest friends, and when I first met him in the end of the 80s, his main object was to learn where he could buy a bulletproof vest, because he had just decided to call his first book "The Other Path," to directly confront the Sendero Luminoso, the shining path, and it's very similar. The difference is that Hernando focuses on private rights in private space, and our program focuses on private rights in public space, and which is focused on schools. It also can be focused on housing projects or law enforcement, any community health projects, anything like that. His program is amazing. I mean, I think if there's probably nobody more universally admired in the world around these issues than Hernando. But nobody knows in the foreign policy community other than to make ritual tributes to him. They don't know how to incorporate what he does in a general vision of foreign policy. And the same is true of our program, because our program, at least currently, has to be implemented by civil society organizations, not by the government itself. I want to just say something quickly about that. I started with the assumption that this could never be done by the government, because the government is so mechanistic in its nature and it's so rule-driven that it just wouldn't. We are finding, however, that people who live in mechanistic environments with mechanized relationships with others are essentially dead, and the entire governmental apparatus of bureaucracies are people who are forced by the system to be dead, largely. And they're depressed, a lot of them. And that's why public school teachers, for instance, something like a third of all public school teachers leave teaching within 5 years.
Wow.
Many of them going to wait table and reporting how much more gratifying it is to wait table than to teach kids. Well, in a mechanized environment, it's a brutal experience. We found that as we are now working with government bureaucrats in transferring our program to the bureaucracy, they absolutely love it. Our program, our executive director reports that our program is transferring organically and spontaneously now to the government. She's not sure that we could stop it even if we wanted to, because they hate so profoundly doing what they're doing, which is the bipartisan consensus around mechanized policies. The heart of the transpartisan vision is about organic, engaged policies and empowered citizens, both inside and outside the government. And when it's easy to see why people in the system try to crush any initiatives that try to take this vision into the government itself, because the whole thing would come down. And that's what we're trying to do with the transpartisan review, and what I've been working on for really decades, long before my book Beyond Left and Right, 25 years ago.
Well, from your lips to God's ears, it may be so that your vision is enculturated in the broader world, not just with the folks you're working with, because I think we have a lot of opportunities for what you're trying to work on to express itself as we see the unsustainability of the industrial mechanistic models being expressed in education and healthcare and food and medicine, everywhere. Your type of vision is hopefully will be the next expression, maybe the information age expression of kind of organic cooperation to solve some of these problems. Where can folks find out more about the Transpartisan Review, Educate Girls Globally, and your work in general?
Well, Educate Girls Globally has a website, www.educategirls.org. This is a very good time to ask that question because in the last couple of weeks, after working on this for 15 years and having people ask us from South Africa to Pakistan wanting to use parts of our program in their work, we have finally now decided to shift our business model and start actively partnering with large organizations so that we can work in multiple countries on a much larger scale. And that's how you can find out about EGG. About the foreign policy. The other question was about the Transpartisan Review. That website is www.transpartisanreview.com. It's not .org. It's .com. And you could also do it by probably Googling my name or Jim Turner's name, and it would come up that way. But we are eager to sign up people to receive the journal and also to receive our weekly notes on various subjects, which I hope people will enjoy.
I'm sure they will. Lori Chickering, thank you for your time, and good luck on your work.
Thank you. I've enjoyed this very much. I was terrified when I started, but I really, you have a very good bedside manner.
Thank you. You did very well.